Have you ever been to Eugene, Oregon?
I have not been to Eugene, Oregon. I've been to Portland, Oregon. I've been to Seattle, so I have been to UW's campus.
We used to talk about the Pacific Northwest a lot,
Yeah,
right? Like,
I'm
is
a
that
big
your favorite
fan.
region?
I'm a big fan of Pacific Northwest. For somebody of my ginger skin and complexion, the weather goes well for me, and it's just beautiful, beautiful landscape. I did not think they would be Big Ten landscape, though.
I didn't. It makes sense. I think that Oregon and Washington, out of a lot of those Pac-12 teams, more so than even in Arizona. I get it. And we were talking just before we hit record. I am excited, but it's not the same pop as a UCLA and a USC. So while we saw that this was coming and we're really moving towards super conferences, if we aren't already there, were you at all surprised by maybe not that it happened, but the quickness with which it happened?
No, I mean I could sit here and say like when the Rutgers Maryland thing happened because Nebraska always made sense,
Yeah.
right? Nebraska geographically, just kind of culturally made sense for the Big Ten. The last four editions before these two really didn't, right? I mean, this was all the new era of capitalism in college football, run amok. If you want, if you think of that, but it's all about media rights. It's all about the TV kind of packages and streaming packages. All this kind of running the show because the NCAA we know doesn't run the show. There's no centralized, power structure that's kind of reining this all in. So you have these conferences just competing with each other and stealing from each other. And once obviously Rutgers Maryland happens, you're always looking to expand more and more. And it made sense that the West Coast would eventually be that. And when Texas and Oklahoma join the SEC, the Big Ten makes its counter move with USC and UCLA. And it's it's weird to talk about because once USC and UCLA happen, it made sense that Oregon and Washington would come next.
They seem like the next two dominoes.
Because they're the good brands, they're big markets, and if you're going to have two West schools, you might as well have two more, and I wonder if there will be at least one more, Stanford, if they want to come in here. But all of this, jockeying of, who's going to be in here, who's not, at the end of the day, is fans, it's good if you're Illinois, because you're in one of the power conferences. You're in one of what is probably going to be two super conferences here. But what does this look like? That we're in the middle of all of this change, and this isn't it. I don't think the Big Ten's stopping at 18.
No.
Whether it's 20 or 24 or is it 32, you know what I mean? We're going to have two super conferences, and what does that all look like? And then in the meantime, how does this all work? What is Illinois playing for now? 11 teams, a conference title meant something. Conference title is going to mean a ton moving forward. It probably means a college football semifinal or whatever. I don't know, what does this all mean moving forward? Because we could talk about the jockeying and this horse race of who's getting who and who ends up where, and it's all entertaining. It's good for our business. But at the end of the day, how does this all change the college football product? It's certainly gone away from tradition, which is what the college football product was all about. But it's more about, who wins all of this? Obviously, USC and UCLA win because they're making way more money. The Big Ten media partners win because they're making more money. But is the product better? Maybe. I don't know. Is the product better for fans?
I think there's a watering down, and naturally you get used to it. So Rutgers and Maryland, even though Illinois can't beat Maryland to save their lives, apparently in basketball, but you've seen, now you're starting to get used to them on the basketball schedule more than football. I think with football, though, when you get to 18 teams, and if you mentioned Stanford, it would only make sense if you had Stanford. Why not add Notre Dame? It seems like those would be the two bedfellows that make sense.
And then divisionally, it makes sense because you could have a 5-team West Division,
right,
another two in the Midwest, and then another East, right?
And that would be fun.
Yes.
Now, let's say there was a 20-team sort of thing, and then you had four divisions and kind of like a mini playoff where you
basically have the Eastern and Western Conference of the AFC and NFC.
That'd be great.
That's what is, I guess, the overall point is this has become the professionalization of college football, which with it is going to become paying the players at some point, right? And salary cap. So that's where we're in this messy middle, I guess, is my whole point. I have so many thoughts and I don't really have thoughts. I have questions about because we're in this middle of, we're having this huge transformation of what college athletics is going to be. And at the end of the day, in 10, 20 years, is it a better product? It could be, because you think of, there could be a 4-team Big Ten playoff to get to the college football playoff.
That's exciting.
If you had, the 4-team Big Ten division winners, they all play to get into their side of the bracket, and then the SEC has 4 teams all get divisions, all play for their side of the bracket. But in the wake of that, we probably lose the ACC, we probably lose the Big 12, we probably lose the Pac-12. But is it a better product? It certainly is for probably the 48 schools that survive, but for the 20 Power 5 schools that might not, like Washington State, Oregon State, that's a struggle.
Well, it's like we can see it coming. We know it's going to happen. We know expansion is going to continue. But we used to do this kind of running trope on the radio show of what does it all mean, And I think
what does it all mean, Basil?
Yeah, that's sort of where I'm at with it. Now, I as an Illinois fan, there are 2 things that bring me a lot of comfort in this. One, just being in the Big Ten. So it's like, you know that you are safe. And I think that, especially as one of the charter members, not that anyone would ever consider this, but you aren't going anywhere. Like you are firmly established, so there is a safety net.
Plus, you're in the right state.
Yeah.
Like, you're not, like, if I'm Rutgers, I'm a little concerned. But if I'm like Purdue, I'm a little bit more concerned. Right? Because they're this kind of the second school in their state. I don't know if contraction would ever happen. I don't think the Big Ten would ever vote out an original member like that. But I don't know if you feel safe if you're one of those non-huge schools. But I do think Illinois is in a really good position because they are definitely, even now, I think they're one of the top 10 more valuable programs based on their history, based on the state they're in.
I would agree with that, yeah. And I think the revenue would back that up. And also,
Yes.
even last year, some of the most watched football games in the Big Ten did include Illinois. So you know that the sleeping giant thing's been bandied about. But I do think with the resurgence of football, that's big. But the other thing that gives me a lot of encouragement is I think that the leadership. I think that Josh Whitman is sort of tailor-made for this moment. And what I do appreciate with him is seemingly very flexible and kind of sees this coming, and he's adapted to it. And I think that youth plays a part of that. I think just sort of the lawyery kind of background of his is actually beneficial here.
I've gotten to know Josh at least well enough professionally that I doubt he likes the watering down of the rivalries of the tradition of the Big Ten.
But he's saying the right things.
But I think he knows they have to do this. Or that they need to do this to survive and to thrive and be one of those 2 power conferences. So I think he's probably had, there's been some reports of, some Big Ten chancellors and presidents. And we got to remember, Robert Jones is the head of the chancellor and presidents. He has a huge hand in all of what is happening right now. But I would imagine Whitman's one of those that has some trepidations about this, but also knows you have to be aggressive. That's how he's been with his entire kind of tenure here. Is we need to be more aggressive in charting our own path. The Big Ten is certainly charting its own path, and it's set itself up for just being a really successful conference moving forward. So it's amazing. I used the word last night when I was talking to some of my friends. They're the first transcontinental conference. If you think about it, like power conference.
Yeah, coast to coast.
Like they are coast to coast, East Coast to West Coast. The only thing they don't touch is the South.
Someone was tweeting this morning. I know Champagne Showers responded to it, but like if you go from Eugene to Piscataway, it's the same distance as New York to London. Yeah. And why not at this point just add Oxford, add McGill and Toronto? I mean, just make it truly the first transcontinental. What would that be? Intercontinental?
Yeah.
I know it's not going to happen and wouldn't make any sense, but this is so crazy. I don't want to get too academic, but you mentioned Robert Jones, and I'm thinking of President Killeen, and as an alum, and you're an alum too. I grew up at a period where the 80s were often talked about as this golden age for Illinois, but I also remember people talking about just there was not really much upheaval with the university leadership, and you just got me thinking about how the university as a whole is in its most stable place that it's been in my life.
And think about this for the Big Ten. Robert Jones, I think, is one of the top 3 tenured presidents. He hasn't been there that long. Josh Whitman is basically tied with Ward Manuel at Michigan for the 3rd most tenured AD.
That's insane.
Once BARDA's done, which BARDA's going to be done very shortly here.
Yeah.
So, yes, you have stability. And what's one thing Illinois has not had for most of our adult
historically,
lives has been stability. So I do think, and there's an alignment. I mean, Robert Jones is aligned with Josh Whitman. Josh Whitman is aligned with his 2 head coaches and main head coaches, and Brad Underwood and Bret Bielema. So I think that's huge right now for Illinois to have that kind of stability and to be honest with you, strong leadership. Josh Whitman has not been perfect. He would admit that. but he has been a strong leader for Illinois when they needed it worst.
I think even when things were not going well with football, that I didn't necessarily pin it on Josh. I think the first attempt with Levy made a lot of sense, and I don't fault him for it because I was as excited as anybody with it.
And at the end, it got him point A to point B.
Yeah.
From laughing stock, embarrassment to we're just not winning enough, but at least we're not embarrassing ourselves off the field. Like that was the main thing. And then you're able to get the Smith Center. So Lovie Smith, you could say, was a little step in the right direction.
Yeah, I would agree with that to an extent. And then you're right. There was a foundational kind of thing that happened there. And even if, God, it was frustrating in those 5 years.
Yeah.
But what I am encouraged by, and you mentioned this too, like how much more important or how much bigger of a deal it will be to win a Big Ten title when you have an 18, 20, 24 team conference. And that leads
for basketball too.
Well, yeah, right. So that leads me to this year, which with this football team, and it's not like they're going to have these meetings and say, guys, understand the conference is going to be 24 teams, so that means we really got to get to Indy this year. But on the first podcast back for me, I charted 3 reasons why I don't think this is going to be like a 2008 or a 2002. Yeah. And one of them is this intangible piece that I think there's enough veterans there, and this coaching staff recognizes that there's a real opportunity in a completely wide open division in this last year of a 14-team Big Ten. So that is one intangible reason why I think, I'm thinking pretty optimistic about this season.
Yeah, I actually just wrote a column about this. I think you and I, in our time watching Illinois, know that every time you're hopeful about Illinois football, the rug kind of gets pulled out from under you. And I saw when was it Jerry DiNardo, Mike Hall, and Howard Griffith all picked Illinois to win the West.
And it's not a crazy prediction to make.
No, and it's not.
I wouldn't necessarily make it, but
in this West, it's not. I did not predict Illinois to win. I just have some question marks about them, and no matter what you think of Iowa and their offense, that team should have won the West last year too. I mean, Illinois and Iowa, one of those teams should have won the West. Neither of them did. Mm-hmm. But I just Iowa has really good strengths on defense, special teams. I think their offense will be better. But yeah, you can pick Illinois, but there was a response to that from Illinois fans of like, oh, this makes me uncomfortable. Like, I don't like when Illinois has expectations. And I understand because 2002, you go 5-7. 2008, you go 5-7 when those teams had no business, especially 2008. With all the talent, Mike Loxley was there that year, correct? Like, he was there. One more year. And how did that happen? Coaching's a part of it. Some attrition's part of it. I think they got, some injuries happen on that team, but that can happen on this team, too. I think Bret Bielema has said, we're capable of winning every game on our schedule, which I've never been able to say before. That helps when you don't have Ohio State and Michigan. Mm-hmm. You almost beat Michigan, of course, last year. But you don't have those 2 teams on your schedule. But he also said, we can lose every game. And that's true because you have 2 huge question marks, quarterback and secondary, right? So those 2 things kept me from putting Illinois, number 1. If Tommy DeVito would have been back, I would have felt a little bit more confident just because I know what he is. We still got to figure out what Luke Altmaier is. But I think your confidence just has to come from this coaching staff. You lose Ryan Walters, and he's a hell of a play caller. I don't know if Aaron Henry can be as good in year 1, right? Like I think Ryan Walters is a special play caller and a special coach, and that's why he got the Big Ten head coaching job. But I think Aaron Henry's going to be pretty good. He was pretty good in the Mississippi State game, and he's just set up to succeed. He's got a strong staff around him. Andy Boo, Terrence Jameson, Jim Leonard's going to be in the building.
That just sort of snuck in there.
Yeah. Just to have that kind of – and then you have Bret Bielema. He's a really good defensive coach. I don't think he's going to let Aaron Henry fail, and Aaron Henry's a really good leader. The key, I think, is Barry Lunny in year 2. We saw progress in year 1, a significant progress in my opinion, but you also saw struggles to consistently – score in the red zone. That is the biggest change for that team, and just getting downfield, some bigger plays. And I think they're adding the talent that can do that, including Luke Altmaier, Malik Elzy. I think Pat Bryant's going to be pretty good this year. But there are enough question marks, but there's enough known. I mean, what you're good at, Cart, is what makes Iowa and Wisconsin good every year. Wisconsin had a bad year last year. They went 6-6.
If that's the floor, then you're
correct.
In a good
that
position,
needs to be the new floor, and how you do that is in the trenches. And Illinois should have a very good offensive line. I think Isaiah Adams is a guy Illinois fans like. That's one of your best NFL prospects on the team. Johnny Newton, Keith Randolph, we know are great. Seth Coleman, Gabe Akers, are great. But Isaiah Adams is one of the top NFL prospects. Julian Pearl is one of the top NFL prospects. And they think Zach Chrysler is going to be really good. this year. So got to see what Josh Krutz, Josh Geske, what those guys can be. But there's a strong enough history here that the staff feels trustworthy, that they're going to get this team in competitive games. And that's the biggest change of the Bret Bielema era has been you're in almost every game. You have a chance in the fourth quarter. And then it just comes down to, do you make the mistakes or does the other team make the mistakes? Last year they were able to win some blowout games early, and then they made mistakes in those close games that ended up hurting them. So I think they'll be in a lot of close games, and I think the floor of this team is the absolute floor would probably be 5 wins for me, but I think they're a bowl team, and the difference between 6 and 9 wins in this division is pretty small.
The reason that I have a little bit of a weight off my shoulder compared to, let's say, 2 years ago with basketball, when Io left but Kofi came back, and there was this, you got to win the Big Ten. You got to win the Big Ten. And it zapped a little bit of the fun out of it that year. And hey, I could have changed my mindset, but I think a lot of fans were just so aching for a regular season title after feeling like they kind of got cheated out of it. So it was like a relief when they did it.
In hindsight, do you remember that more, or do you remember the second round NCAA tournament loss more?
No, you know what? I actually,
the Iowa moment was
that moment's an all-timer, and that made the Houston loss whatever, you know. But at a certain, we'll touch basketball later this fall. But there's a lot of intrigue with that for sure. But with this season, part of the reason that I feel a little bit less encumbered, I feel unencumbered, if you will, is that I'll take 7-8 wins and be happy. If you tell me right now we're going to Music City Bowl on New Year's Eve,
yes, please.
I'm happy as a clam, right? Now,
it's the difference between basketball and football expectations, right?
Absolutely.
There. But also, I do agree with you that would be, like, people have asked me what's a success, and I said if they hit their over, which they're at 6.5,
6.5, yeah.
If I would go the over,
Me too.
But if they go the over, that's a success given the history of this program.
100%.
Now, I think their expectation is we're going to play in Indy, right? And we should be in the mix for 9 or 10 wins, whatever it is. They probably say win them all. Johnny Newton will say that.
And the thing is, you could.
I don't expect them to.
I don't. But you could have won 10-2. You were closer to 10-2 than 6-6 last year. One could argue.
Correct. Absolutely, they were, and that's why last year, as great as it was a missed opportunity. Mm-hmm. This year, as you were saying, it's a huge opportunity because of the question marks for Iowa's offense. I think they're going to be really good, but Wisconsin, a new coaching staff, it's exciting. It's a lot of newness, and they're going through a lot of change, and sometimes that doesn't – I mean, look at Nebraska when they change things all the time and they add a bunch of transfers. A lot of times that doesn't work well, but they do have a good coach, and they're going to be interesting. But I think Purdue's going to have a big change year. Nebraska's, I think it's more of a rebuild than people think. I think they're going to be competitive, upgraded hugely at coach. Northwestern's a mess, right? Minnesota's good. They're solid. I could see them competing for a Big Ten West championship, but I think they're very beatable. So, yeah, all of that, this is a great chance to get to Indianapolis another year, and you have enough returning that you feel like you have the opportunity to do it. So, again, it's going to come down to these close games and how well probably your quarterback play is.
We've already touched on the 3 things that make me think this is not going to be a repeat of 2008. Coaching, intangible factor, basically the chip on the shoulder, that knowing that locker room is thinking Indy. And that's the goal, not merely making a bowl. And then the third one you kind of hit on there was the schedule. And I've been kind of pouring through it like Lon and I used to do Dare to Dream, but I'm not going to go so far as to say that. But I did borrow a page from Lovie Smith. I broke it down into 3-game increments. I broke it down into quarters. Now, there is one quarter of this season that is particularly tough, and that's the third quarter, which is, I believe, that's the Maryland, Minnesota, Wisconsin stretch, where you could go 0-3. You could go, if you went 3-0, that'd be absolutely fantastic. And then I think the first 3 games are going to be especially telling. But there are some very, very winnable games, and I would throw Florida Atlantic, Indiana, Northwestern, Nebraska, because you get them at home, 4 right there off the bat. Not putting anything in ink, but you got to feel comfortable with those. And then I just look at those first 2 games and think if you start 2-0, you're probably on your way to another very good season.
Yeah. The non-conference is so compelling. I think they wish Florida Atlantic were probably the leadoff game because, I mean, Tom Herman's there, which makes them interesting, but they're just not going to be as talented as you. But Toledo's a really hard opponent for a week 1 opponent.
Not quite, I hope, Western Michigan in 2016 when they went to a Cotton Bowl, but
I could see Toledo being as good as Purdue. this year.
Oh, 100%.
Right? Like
Yeah.
that. So it's a really difficult first game. I think it's going to be within 10 points, the spread there, and probably within 7. Kansas is just such a fun contrast of styles because they're a wide open spread. Their quarterback's really good. They're going to throw it a lot against the secondary that's unproven. So that's a really early test for Aaron Henry and his defense. But I do think Illinois is going to be able to run the ball down their throats, and I think Barry Lundy's going to have a good game there. So I can see it being. I mean, we haven't seen shootouts with Bret Bielema, but that could be a really interesting first huge test or second huge test. Then you get Penn State right after that. So we're going to learn a lot about this team right away. But the thing is, like, even if you go 1-1 in your first 2 games, well, it doesn't mean anything for the Big Ten West. You could still go 6-3 in the Big Ten West and win it and go to Indy.
I mean, Purdue last year lost to Syracuse in a game where they looked terrible.
Right.
It's funny because I watch these early season games and try to, which is such a fool's errand, but you prognosticate, man, Purdue looks terrible in Syracuse. And then, 8 weeks later, they're beating you pretty soundly at home. Yeah. I do think that
the other point I want to make,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but NFL talent. I would add that to your list. You have real NFL talent, especially on the trenches. We mentioned that a little bit, but Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph, Randolph has a chance to be a very high draft pick. Isaiah Adams and Julian Pearl have a chance to be high draft picks. Like you have to have those guys. And Illinois has some of those guys, and then maybe in the future we'll see what the skill players produce. I think Pat Bryant could play in the NFL. I think Isaiah Williams is going to get his opportunity. The running backs, Bret Bielema has a good history of that. Taz Nicholson has a little bit of buzz as an NFL prospect. So I do think you got NFL talent, and that's slowly getting better and better.
Special teams, not the sexiest unit to talk about, but I take odd comfort in that this year because I really think they finished the year strong, kicking-wise at least.
Yeah.
So I'm not overly concerned with that, and I just feel like it's funny how you can go back to Bret Bielema's first year, and then you go to his second year, and you're much closer to 7-5 his first year than you were 4-8. You're much closer to 10-2 last year than you were to 6-6. All that to say that unlike the Beckman, we were 17 plays away from winning at Washington. You really are a few plays away from Bret Bielema having a pretty astounding record through 2 years. And special teams probably had a hand in 2 of those losses last year. Yeah. Though, in fairness to them, I don't think you beat Iowa without the punting and the kicking that you had.
Right.
So maybe it balances out.
Yeah, and Caleb Griffin was really good.
He was.
Down the stretch. He's a really good kickoff guy. He started off the year struggling, but then Hugh Robertson really cost you in 2 games. And that hurt. That I talked to him about.
Does the Michigan, because if I recall, the Michigan game, what set up their final drive was a bad punt. Is that correct?
The first drive
Indiana was one game that cost you.
Well, Michigan State is the one I think of.
Yeah.
I think he had 2 really bad punts. It was a windy day. It was one of those 50-mile-an-hour wind days. I think we had 3 of those last year. But he punted in the back end of one of his blockers, and that set up a touchdown for Michigan State. But Michigan game, one of the things that kind of gets overlooked, the first field goal came after a 40-yard, I think, punt return or kick return, one of the 2. Yeah, I think Illinois had a touchdown, and then they got a kick return for 40 yards, and that set up the first of 3 field goals for Jake Moody in that game. But yeah, I mean, the Indiana game, he wasn't the only thing that cost Illinois. Of course, people can go to the referees with Brian Hightower, but 4 turnovers certainly played a role in that.
You
dominated them.
You did. It was very frustrating.
Michigan State, though, you had an opportunity to come back in that game, but special teams really, it wasn't even just Hugh Robertson. I went back and kind of watched highlights of that game. I don't remember why, but I did. And I think Peyton Vining had 2 bad, botched kick returns where Illinois got the ball within their own 10-yard line. And that's the stuff that really costs you in these close games. And then you think of, I go back to Maryland in 2021. In Bret Bielema's first year.
When you played it in that game and the Purdue game a couple weeks later, or the week after, you played it uber conservative. And I kind of understand why, but it cost you late in those games because partly bad special teams.
Yeah. So special teams, he plays a huge role. When you get in these close games especially, it becomes more under the spotlight. But Illinois was really fortunate under Lovie Smith in the final year of Bret Bielema that they had Blake Hayes, they had James McCourt, Chase McLaughlin. Right, and you worked in some new guys. I think Caleb Griffin has a chance to play at the next level. I don't know if Hugh does, especially given his age. But
how old is he? Is he 30?
He's 30.
That's incredible.
Yeah, he turned 30 in January. So he was good though at the end of the year. The last 3 games, Hugh Robertson was really good, and he was really good in the spring when we saw him. So I think he needed that under the limelight and learn from it. But I do think special teams will be, just to get to your point, I think they'll be better there than they were last year.
What's the formula for this to be a good year for Altmaier? Technically a sophomore in terms of eligibility, right?
Yeah,
Which
so
is
he's
part
got
of the
3
reason
years
I
on.
love that transfer. But, my sort of calculation as to how this can be a good year for him is that there's no way he's going to match, I don't think, the efficiency of a Tommy DeVito.
Right.
But what he might lack in that, I'd like to think being able to stretch the field a little bit more. I go back to that bowl game, and I love Tommy, and he's welcome back to Lot 30 because his parents would always tailgate in Lot 31, and he's sort of a folk hero for good reason.
I'm sure that was a pretty good tailgate with Tom
Oh,
Senior.
hell yeah. Talked to his mom. It was actually before the Iowa game, and I talked to his mom for about 10 minutes, and she's every bit the Jersey mom you would
that is
expect.
the Jersey family. that's
Totally,
for sure.
totally. So that bowl game, though, I think kind of indicated or highlighted his deficiencies. There was one play in particular where if Isaiah Williams wide open, it's like a 20, 25-yard slant out kind of pass. He's wide open, missed badly on the throw. And I think that would have put you in position for the game-winning field goal or to ice it because at that point you were up 12-10, maybe. Regardless, that was one play that I think, indicative of his relative lack of ability to stretch the field. And I'm thinking, hey, Altmaier could be 10% less completion percentage, yet still give you a different look.
Well, it's amazing because Tommy DeVito did what Illinois struggled at for so long, which was hit singles and doubles. Right? Like he hit singles and doubles really well at a very efficient rate. Like within 10 yards, he was great. I also don't think he had the best wide receiver core. Let's be honest. Like Isaiah Williams was still trying to become a wide receiver. He got way better at it last year.
Pat Bryant was young.
Pat Bryant's still young. Casey Washington's not explosive. Brian Hightower's not explosive.
So was the deal with Hightower because when he transferred, I was concerned.
Yeah.
He seemed to be a good outlet on like 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8s, and I know Casey Washington can do that.
Big body.
Did he not? Was the big body giving us maybe a heightened expectation of big play potential that maybe wasn't there consistently?
Yeah, he's just not a guy who's going to get separation.
Okay.
He's a guy that's got to go up and get it or box somebody out.
Where did he land?
He's in Cal.
Oh,
I mean, kind of close to home for him.
Yeah.
I mean, San Francisco's not really close to LA, but it's way closer than Champaign is.
Sure.
So I think he's gonna have a bigger role there. But he was a solid piece of that wide receiver rotation. 450 yards last year. He was kind of a guy who could be a big play threat. They just don't have anybody who can take the top off of defense. I do think Isaiah Williams is going to play that role more. I think Bret Bielema noticed that, hey, this guy's speed we can use, but that means they need another slot to step up. So that position, George McDonald's done a really good job recruiting. It's just they're so young. But can Pat Bryant take that next step? Can he be more explosive? Because we did see signs of him, especially early in the year.
yeah, before the injury.
Yeah, he kind of faded late in the year, but early in the year, he looked like a future number one. Kind of reminds me of like a Malik Turner type of guy. But then, of course, you have Malik Elzy, who's got not just size and physicality, but also has explosiveness. Like he can run away from people and get on top of people. But Kanari Wilshire's a guy I'll name, a freshman that they're really excited about, just pure speed. Hank Beatty's I think Hank Beatty's a slot you
Good
can
hands
play along with Isaiah Williams. Great hands, can kind of play those underneath routes, while Isaiah can maybe stretch the field a little bit more this year. But we started with Luke Altmaier, the expectations. I do expect him to be able to hit the home run more, but he's still got to be able to hit singles and doubles. And that's a huge part of offense, so a huge part of getting to a manageable 2nd and 3rd down. And for me, it's about limiting big mistakes, the crushing mistakes. He's going to have growing pains, right? He just hasn't played a lot of football. Tommy DeVito had played so much Power 5 football. Luke Altmaier has experience in a quarterback room, in some big environments of playing a little bit of football. I mean, he played in the Sugar Bowl. But there's going to be mistakes he makes that Tommy DeVito wouldn't have. So you just hope he limits those enough to where the upside of him, the down the field throws, and the other, it's not just the down the field throws, because it's not like I don't think he has a Wes Lunt arm, but he's got a really good arm with great touch.
Mm-hmm.
The other part of his game that they're really excited about is his running ability. Tommy showed it early in the season. Then he had the ankle injury. But I thought they could have used him more in the red zone. I thought they could use Isaiah Williams a little bit more in the red zone.
That was the one touchdown they got in the bowl game, right?
Right.
Tommy.
Yeah, so I just think they can use his legs, but the downside of that is he's skinny. I mean, he's a slender guy comparatively to some of the other guys they've had. So He's got to hold up physically as well to the Big Ten. So he's a huge storyline. I mean, he's a huge key to this team being any good, but he is talented.
This coaching staff tends to play things close to the vest. You were going through the wide receivers, though, and they seem to talk pretty highly about that room. They seem to talk pretty highly about the quarterback room. Do you think that the sense within that Smith Performance Center is that they have their guy for the next 3 years? I'm sure that they would have taken Hudson Card, because who wouldn't?
Yeah.
But
I think Hudson Card's pretty good. That's
probably
that's why if I were Purdue, I feel like I got a chance there. Yeah.
But God, that game's just gonna be. I'm gonna pull my hair out that entire freaking time,
because I think both coaching staffs are pretty excited about that game.
Why not? I need to listen to the Ryan Walters interview you had with him, and I think it's all. I've kind of gotten over it. I don't actually feel surly towards him. It's.
Oh, I can guarantee you, there's some surliness between those staffs.
Yeah.
It's a competitive fire, right? And I get it, because Ryan does some things similar, because he learned under Bret Bielema. Some of his staff was here under Bret Bielema, but it's gonna be fun. It's fun that rivalry, which I don't think has been that big, added up a couple notches now.
Do you think they feel like they have their guy in Luke Altmaier?
I think that remains to be seen. I think they think he can be, but you got to see it when the live bullets are flying, right? And they are excited about Donovan Leary. I don't think he's going to win the job.
And only a sophomore eligibility as well, right? Or technically a freshman because of COVID.
Yeah, and John Paddock adds a nice competitiveness, leader, vocal guy. He's really undersized. He's not as talented as the other quarterback, so I don't think he's going to be a starter. But I do think Donovan Leary long-term is a piece they really value. Luke Altmaier is more talented. He's a better athlete. But if Altmaier were to struggle long-term, I do think Leary's a guy they're pretty excited about that could potentially be an answer there. But I think they're cautiously optimistic that Luke Altmaier will be that guy. I mean, they wouldn't have added him if they didn't. But I still think there's a kind of hey, he's got to go prove it within that room. And they've talked a lot about how they do things differently than Ole Miss. Bret Bielema mentioned it. And then today we talked to Barry Lunny, and I know you've talked to Barry. He mentioned it again, that he's learning how we do things. I wonder if you think of Lane Kiffin and that offense. It's pretty high-flying, aggressive. Bret Bielema was a little bit more conservative, taking care of the football, football IQ, down in distance, when to take your chances, when not to. So I wonder if there's going to be some growing pains and just all of that. So it's just been interesting. And I asked Barry again, like, what is that difference? And he wouldn't really dive fully into it and give me the specifics. But my read is just Lane's offense is really aggressive, score 45 points. Illinois is not trying to win football games that way. They're trying to win football games by being smart. They do want to take their chances when those chances are there and when they're open. But I wouldn't say it's conservative, but it's a little bit more opportunistic.
Oh, sure. And then also knowing that your defense is probably going to be solid.
Complementary. They talk about complementary football and football IQ and football 101 all the time.
Well, I actually found last year, I mean winning cures all, and certainly the last 5 games were frustrating in many respects, but when they were 7-1, it was I found the efficiency really exciting. And I'll go back to the Minnesota game. I mean, he scored 26 points total, so it's not like he put 45 on him. Might as well have been, though.
You dominated that game. You only won by 12.
Yeah, right. But at the same time, even when you were up 6, you felt like, game over. I mean, there's this weird comfort and confidence that builds when you see a team that just does all the little things right, which is such a far cry from even Illinois' successful years were usually predicated on an explosive offense and an opportunistic defense. Not a great defense, but an opportunistic one, even the Rose Bowl year. So there is this weird sexiness in the relative unsexiness of this. Okay, we got good guys in the trenches. We have an efficient offense. We have a stingy defense. I'm finding that all those years of getting, very frustrated of the Iowas and Wisconsins of the world, getting the 7, 8, 9 wins, that I am more than happy to replicate that. I don't need run and gun, 5 wide, any of that crap. I just want wins. And I like the identity that they seem to be fostering with it.
And that style of football is consistent, right? Like that's the biggest thing. Like, Lovie Smith, the one issue was you relied so much on turnovers that it was kind of fluky at times.
And we could sense that.
Yeah, you absolutely could. And offensively, they were a mess. But the key is you're not going to have the number 1 defense in the country. Right? You're not going to have the number 1 scoring defense likely in the country. I think you're going to be really good.
Can you have top 20? top 25.
Yeah,
Still?
sure.
I think so.
Absolutely. I think you could. I think they'll be one of the better defenses in the Big Ten, which is always, they might have like 8 teams in the top 25, but they'll be there. But offensively, you got to take a step forward. And that's why-
91, I think, scoring offense last year.
Yeah, and everyone talks about replacing Chase Brown. Listen, Chase Brown was awesome. It was one of the best years individually in Illinois history, which is a great history of running backs. But Illinois was middle of the pack running the ball. Like rushing yards per game, they were middle of the pack in the country, middle of the pack in the Big Ten.
Second half of the season, especially.
Yeah, they can get better there. And the biggest thing is the red zone. Like they move the football really well, pretty much from the 20 to 20. They have to be able to score in the red zone. They have to get more big plays. I don't expect them to be one of the high-flying, biggest play teams in the country, but just the plays of 20-plus yards, there has to be way more of them. They were bottom half in plays of 20-plus yards. They were 119th in plays of 40-plus yards. They have to get more explosive on that side of the ball. But I do think you saw the signs of Barry, what he's trying to be offensively, where it's physical, but it's also a little bit more modern spread elements with screen passes, but you're still going to just try and bowl people over. I'm interested. I think that's one of the biggest storylines of the year outside of Aaron taking over for Ryan, but it's how does Barry Lunny build on that offensive performance? Because if they're a top half offense, I think they can win the Big Ten West.
Oh, their top half, I would presume Indy at that point, because I can't assume that Iowa's going to have a top half offense. And then all things being equal, 2 good defenses there. Talking to Barry, I really appreciated his candor, and I thought he seemed open and authentic. I didn't really have any questions about that. And even with the struggles last year, there were moments where I got frustrated.
Yeah,
and then
he got frustrated. I can tell you that.
Well,
much,
yeah, for sure, and he admitted as much. And I think, though, in reflection, I want to be careful about this with Chase, because I remember going into this basketball season. Well, I love Kofi, but Kofi kind of set your identity. And I asked Barry Lunny something similar about Chase Brown and how that influences your play calling, and he was pretty honest about it. Like, if you got, the comparison I made to him is if you got Eddie Van Halen in your band, he's taking a guitar solo every song because he's Eddie Van Halen. You got to give Chase Brown
play the hits,
play the hits, right? Or as Paul Petrino said, feed the studs, right? Now, that all said, though, I do think that I have this confidence in Barry Lunny that really the stats shouldn't allow me to have, and yet I feel as if he is a sound offensive coordinator that will maybe be able to open. I mean, he said himself, the first to second year is such a huge jump, not just for him as a play caller, but for an offense that is still returning more guys than not.
Yeah, and your team is not better because Chase Brown is gone.
No.
Like, it is not. He's an unbelievable player.
And we'll get to the secondary in a bit, too.
But there is an element of, does it open things up for Barry? Because he doesn't feel like he's got to feed a Heisman candidate. He doesn't feel like I have no one else. Doesn't have. You don't have that crutch anymore of Chase Brown. So Moore is going to rely on that. But also, Josh McCray's injury was significant last year. You didn't have another running back like that ready to play. I think they would have loved to have worked Jordan Anderson in to be a bigger back, but by the time he was ready, you were playing in huge games, Michigan State and Purdue.
Not a good place.
That's give a guy a first carry in one of those games. That's a really tough place. And that's what I find interesting about this year is, do you have a game where you can work some of these depth pieces in?
You mentioned that with Joe. You do not. You don't unless you
Florida Atlantic.
And at that point, you kind of hope so, because that's game 4. After a big one against Penn State, you hope somehow in that second half you can find your way to a few score lead.
But Josh McCray just would have helped Illinois immensely because, one, you would have had a goal line threat. You would have had a guy who can really move the pocket. Because as good as Chase Brown is at everything, his weakness is he's not a guy who moves the pile. He's just not. He's not that big of a guy. That's like asking like Josh Ferguson to do it. Josh Ferguson, that wasn't who he was. So the fact that you have that option now and potentially Jordan Anderson and Caden Fagan to do that is really good. But also you're going to have probably 2-3 running backs running the ball. It means your main guy, which I think could end up being Josh McCray, is probably going to have more energy at the end of the game. Chase was worn down. I mean, he had like 43 carry game.
He was ineffective. I mean, think about the Northwestern game. Very ineffective. And I think he
was injured by that point. But Michigan, he was unbelievable. In the fourth quarter, he looked like he was out of gas. In some of those games, he looked like he was out of gas late in the games. And because you relied on him so much, you just didn't really have anywhere else to go. That's where it's so important that the guys in year 2 of the system take their game to another level. Isaiah Williams needs to be one of the best wide receivers in the Big Ten. I think he's going to get a ton of touches this year. I'm not surprised if he had 100 touches. Pat Bryant, show that you can be a number one wide receiver. You're going to be an NFL prospect, right? I think he can get to that level this year. I think Tip Ryman's in for a good year. I know he didn't catch the ball very well down the field last year. He's been working all off season, and the fact that we're talking about Tip Ryman after he walked on as a 6'6", 217-pound walk-on.
You were banging that drum well before anybody else.
They loved him.
Yeah.
They loved him for everything you wanted to look forward to be. Tip Ryman was that last year, and now that they think he can take a big step as a pass catcher. So I think he's a guy that can help elevate the entire room. And then you're hoping that whether it's Elzy or Kanari Wilcher or Colin Dixon or whoever it is, I think Reggie Love can be a very good player. You're just hoping that you lost your best player, but you're hoping everyone else steps it up so that you have more weapons, makes you less predictable, and makes Barry's job a little bit easier. And I think Luke Altmaier's legs is going to play into that, because for half the season, you didn't have really that threat last year of having that quarterback run.
Yeah, I like this position to be in where any improvements that you need to make are more incremental than exponential. And that while you are losing a Chase Brown and you are losing a top 5 defensive back along with 2 other NFL draftees in the secondary, you do feel as if other areas in each unit are going to naturally be better, so that can take a little bit off the onus off of it. You know, the good thing about the defense is, and we saw this plenty with the really good Lovie Smith Bears defenses, if you have a good front, it makes the secondary look that much better. Now, if the secondary is just plain bad, which
what Lovie never had here.
Yeah.
Like Lovie never really had a strong defensive front.
A couple individuals that were
Carney
strong,
was
maybe?
good.
Yeah.
I mean, Roundtree before, obviously, the accident was turning into a really good player. Roderick Perry was pretty good. You know, obviously some of the linebackers, Delshon Phillips, I think was underrated. Jake Hansen, but you weren't strong up front. This front 7, I guess I could call it a front 6 because you got 5 defensive backs on the field most of the time. This front 6 could play for Michigan, Penn State.
And that's not hyperbole. I mean,
No.
This is NFL draftees all
Penn
over
State's
the place.
defense is absolutely loaded. Like, absolutely loaded this year. That's the difference between them and 2 years ago when Illinois beat them.
Yeah.
Michigan, obviously loaded, but I think if you put Illinois' defensive front 6 in Michigan uniforms, nobody would notice the difference.
That's high praise. I think, you know.
Maybe Ohio State, even though Ohio State might not be as productive, but those guys are just freaks. Like, they're all 5-star freaks.
For sure. I look at this secondary and the kind of conundrum you're facing where there is inexperience, but the good news is that there will be less on them because of the strength of that front 6. Now, that being said, you know, Taz Nicholson, you slot him in. I know that you and Joey had a really good podcast where you were kind of piecing together the secondary from what you do know, but what are the second and third most known quantities back there? Because from what I understand, one of your safeties is not
Matt Bailey.
Yeah, Bailey's not playing at the moment.
Yeah, and he's in a boot right now. So a little bit concerned I would have about Matt Bailey being ready for week 1. I mean, Bret Bielema said he should be, but I guess we'll see.
Though they did spend much of the offseason getting another guy, and they kept getting more and more guys as if they kind of knew that this could be a thing.
I wrote about it this morning, about that competition. I think it's the most intriguing position battle of the Illinois training camp. I mean, offensive line is really interesting. I think Josh Kreutz is going to be your center, and I think Zach Crisler's going to play right tackle, and I think Josh Geske might be your right guard. Him and Jordan Slaughter kind of battling that one out.
I'm excited for Kreutz.
Yeah, I mean, the name, it gets a lot of people excited, but they tried to, we'll get back to the secondary.
Yeah.
They spent all offseason trying to upgrade.
They did, and the guy that went to Auburn, that would have been your center.
For all the Inquirer members, yes. Avery Jones committed to Illinois once, if you didn't know that, at how many times we've written it. But they loved him, and he was really good. And that's why that one stung, because it was a big upgrade, and I think Illinois, if they had him, boy, this offensive line might have a chance to be better than last year. Well, he goes to Auburn. They added JUCO kid in Will Lease. I think he'll add to the competition. But it seems like Kreutz made a good impression in the spring, and he's undersized. I mean, he's going to get this in his entire career, just like Doug Kramer did. He's a little smaller than Doug Kramer. Probably a hair over 6 foot. I think they listed him at 280.
Wasn't
like
Luke Buckus undersized?
Yes, I think Kreutz is a little smaller.
Okay. I only raised that comparison because of the lineage kind of thing.
It's a position you can overcome it, especially from what I understand in Barry's offense. For whatever reason, they move him a lot. They move the center a lot. But you got to be intelligent. You got to be tough. Josh Kreutz is those two things.
Sure.
So I am excited to see what he is because I liked him as a prospect. For all his undersizedness, the flaw there, I did think he could be a Kramer type or Butkus type that just overcomes it because he's good at everything else. He's quick off the ball. So I'm really interested to see him. I think Zach Chrysler's in for a big year. But getting back to the secondary, the one upside of your struggle of staying healthy there last year is Tyler Strain played a lot.
And was pretty good late in the season.
He played really well.
Mm-hmm.
He played really well.
Didn't he get most of the snaps in the bowl game too?
Yeah, he played a lot.
Which I thought the secondary did everything you asked them to.
The secondary was fantastic, and that game, especially against Will Rogers. I know they had a bunch of passing yards.
They were going to get theirs.
Yeah, maybe the final drive where they get,
Well, the frustrating thing, I mean, not to beat a dead horse, because I had such a great time down there despite the result. I mean, Tampa was great. The bowl game was great. But
saw you in Ybor. It was a good time.
Ybor was great. Yeah, great neighborhood to stay in. And went to St. Pete the day after the bowl game. So loved it. Would totally go back to the ReliaQuest. But it was by the skin of their teeth that they finally broke through the end zone. If you remember that touchdown.
Yeah.
They reviewed it. We couldn't get a good look on it in the stands. Yeah. And I just think that speaks to, Aaron Henry as a play caller, I thought had a great play in that game. But the secondary and Tyler Strang being one of those young guys that was kind of thrust in there, along with a few others like the Iowa game.
Well, I wanted to mention Tyler Strang I thought was pretty good last year, and they tried to upgrade a corner, right? They've added 2 JUCOs and Caleb Patterson and Prince Ford that I think give them a little bit more veteran, a little bit more maturity. But they got some freshmen who are intriguing, but you don't want to play those guys right away.
Sabor Kareem's your guy.
Love Sabor before he was a 4-star, and I thought him and Jair Hill were like neck and neck for me. So when they landed Sabor, I tried to make it a bigger deal. He just didn't have the 4-star by his name yet. I eventually got it in the composite. Really talented. Now, he might take some time, but the great thing about the opt-outs too that people didn't like that those players opted out. Tyler Strain played. Xavier Scott, who's going to be probably your nickel replacing Quarton, is going to play a lot, and he got those snaps under his belt in a huge situation. I mean, Xavier Scott's playing at Michigan in the Big House. Didn't play well that game, by the way, but he's got that experience. He's already gotten his feet wet, so that now going into this year, he's not going to be all that nervous. Going against Kansas, like he's played bigger games than that. And then Matthew Bailey, of course, if he gets healthy, they think he can be a star. And he can play multiple safety positions. But then you've added 3 transfer safeties. Nicario Harper, I think, is kind of a thumper in the box, a really good athlete. Probably play that Sidney.
And by
Brown.
that you mean the Sidney?
Yeah, Sidney Brown kind of role. Could potentially play nickel as well. Demetrius Hill looks the part. Like really looks the part. When you're a freshman All-American, that term is so loaded. You think he's going to be a star right away. I still think he's got to prove himself at this level, but they really like his talent, and they think he's really smart. Aaron Henry told us that the other day. And then Clayton Bush. I think, he's kind of got some Prather Hudson to him, but he's a bigger athlete. He's a better athlete. Gives you more depth there. So I think they did a really good job of making sure that one injury does not just take away that entire secondary this year. So the depth they've added across the roster, there's still some issues, I would say, especially on the defensive line. But the secondary, I think, can withstand an injury or two. And the staff's just been really good at developing them. You lost Ryan Walters, but Aaron Henry's been a part of that. Finellis obviously comes from the same coaching tree. So they do a great job of developing the skill sets there. And just the mindset of that feisty, physical, outplay your size, like that Devin Witherspoon had, Sidney Brown had. I still think they got that in that room.
They don't seem overly concerned about the secondary.
It's going to be the weakness and the unknown of the defense, but I do think defensive back has more talent than a linebacker for Illinois, the inside linebackers. Mm-hmm. But you mentioned it, that if we know what Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph are going to be, and Johnny Newton, I don't know if he can play better than he played last year. I don't know if he can play better, but just by coming back, he's now projected from like a 4th rounder to a 1st rounder just by coming back for another year.
Make a few $100,000 in the meantime. And
right, $1 million probably. Yeah. But I don't know if he can be better, but he's not going to be worse. Mm-hmm. Keith Randolph, I think, can get way better. T-Raw Edwards, I think, is going to be good, but the guys I think can get way better are Gabe Akis, who's pretty consistent for a freshman. Wasn't as flashy. He had a couple 2-sack games against some lower-level opponents, but I think he can be better against the Big Ten, just getting to the quarterback, getting the quarterback on the ground. And then Seth Coleman, I thought, had a 3 or 4 week stretch. During that Big Ten West win streak in October, he was lights out. Then he had a little injury and kind of faded down the stretch. Yeah. Those guys, if they get better, if they take another huge step to being NFL guys, I think that makes the secondary job so much easier. And I think that's an area Bret Bielema thought, as good as the defense was, we weren't good enough of getting the quarterback to the ground and pressuring the quarterback even more.
Yeah, this is way back in 1994. Great defense, one of the best in the country, and it was the strength of the front seven.
Yeah.
If you asked me to name one of the 4 defensive backs, I'd actually struggle to do that right now. But
those guys should have plenty of opportunities for interceptions with the pressure that
they should.
seven.
And I mean, even last year it was Matthew Bailey that got the game-sealing interception against Iowa. Why? Because they got who was the scrub quarterback for Iowa? I forget. I mean. Not Stanzi. Stanzi was way back in the day.
Padilla.
Poor Padilla, who came in for who was the
Peters.
Oh, good God.
Spencer Peters.
Let's end this by talking about the overall strength of the program, and then I won't put, hey, how many wins is Illinois going to get this year? But I think we could talk about we could do a ceiling and a floor kind of thing too for fun. But I guess my second to last question here would be just a general question about Bret Bielema and what it's like for you to cover a program that is in this general state of health, which it does feel like a healthy program when you've covered so many programs that have been in flux, constant changeover. It's been a pretty tumultuous 15 years for Illinois football, dating back to the tail end of the Zook era. So for me, from a fan's perspective, I just feel a tremendous weight off.
Yeah.
Knowing that there's some known things when you go into a Saturday in Lot 31, you kind of know what you're going to get in the stadium, and that's more than I can say for most of my experience just watching it.
Yeah, the one thing, I mean, obviously he's such a competent coach, which Illinois football has needed for so long. I do think there's some things we could quibble about with his in-game execution at times, but there's not a lot of, like, what is he thinking with the time on the clock? There's not a lot of those things happening. When it felt like Illinois football, they couldn't just execute a game plan. Like they just couldn't execute like, hey, there's this much time on the clock, we should call a timeout, or let's wind down the clock a little bit. Like clock management stuff, like they always struggled with. But the biggest thing is he's such a good CEO. Everything is organized, everything is purposeful, and everybody is on, from what I've understood, not everyone's gonna be happy all the time, right? Because only so many people can play. Not every parent's gonna be happy all the time. But he communicates in a way that it doesn't seem to become a problem in his program. The coaches are all on the same page. The way they talk about, the way they recruit, they're all on the same page. They're all involved. Can't tell you how many times, whether it was Tim Beckman or Bill Cubit or Lovie Smith, it felt like they were all kind of working different angles and not everyone was aligned and there was like complaining about each other. That doesn't happen with this staff. They're all so complimentary of each other and help each other and know they're all going for the same purpose, and that if everybody does well, they're all going to do well. Just like Ryan Walters and Kevin Kane and Joe Dineen and Grant O'Brien all got jobs at Purdue, right? Like it all helps everybody out. So I just think his ability to control every aspect of his program, like he's an insane work ethic, probably works too much, but it's because he wants to have every aspect covered, and he has got his fingerprints on every aspect of the program. That was not the case with Lovie Smith, right? That was just not the case. Now, he'll let his coordinators call plays. He'll let the coaches coach their guys, but there's a game plan. Bielema has his input, and then he goes and lets his guys coach. But with his players, there's just an unbelievable relationship. I mean, go back 2 years ago, Carp. The fact that Illinois did not have a ton of transfers and just like lose their entire roster. The fact that they kept all those guys who are now in the NFL or are still huge parts of this team.
I mean, even this last offseason.
Yeah, or
who
stay
left?
like
Hightower.
Johnny Newton's still here.
Yeah.
Isaiah Adams is still here. It kind of, no matter what you think of Brad Underwood, the fact that Terrence Shannon and Colm Hawkins stayed is a very good sign about that coaching staff.
Yes.
And I think that's the same thing about these guys, because they could be in NFL training camps right now. They chose to come back because they trust that staff to get them to the next level. Aaron Henry stayed here instead of going with Ryan Walters because he trusts Bret Bielema to help develop him. Jim Leonard is now in the office because he thinks Bret Bielema can help him become a head coach. I think that says all you need to know about Bret Bielema and what people think of him.
Yeah. It trickles down all the way to the fans in the parking lot. Like I just noticed last year, and it was really that October swing that I think changed my entire complexion
he actually
of what this is.
He communicates with you fans. Like he actually cares. He's in the community.
He gets it.
he gets that there's a difference of being a CEO of a college program than, say, the NFL program. And that, especially in a program like Illinois, you have to be out there hawking tickets. You have to be until you win enough to where people are just, it's the thing to do. He embraces that. And, dude, he wants to be here. Like, I wrote it. I know I did get the FOIA back that, yes.
Oh, you got the FOIA back?
Yes, he's got a non-compete.
It's in the contract.
Big Ten. The only job I think he would ever leave for is an NFL head coaching job.
Yeah. And if that is the case, and you get to that point, guess what? Aaron Henry, new head coach, you just move.
Or Barry Leonard or whatever it is. Yes.
And I have thought about that because, we see in college football, well, it doesn't really matter what sport, but coaches are like, well, I don't know, 5-6 years, and then they move on. And those are usually the unsuccessful ones. But even successful ones, I thought to myself, if there was a need for a change or he goes somewhere, you would feel as if, okay, well, this isn't the reset button. You feel like, okay, well, you're just kind of continuing on from where he left in a similar way to what I guess Paul Chryst was right after him at Wisconsin, and it was able to roll along.
Yeah, I just think he hasn't told me this, but I asked him about, like, you saw Hayden do what he did at Iowa. You saw what Barry was at Wisconsin. Like, do you see that at Illinois? And he's like, yeah, I knew that my legacy at Wisconsin was not going to be Barry Alvarez. He was the guy after Barry Alvarez. And I know there was trepidation about Iowa. Like, that would be the one job.
That's why
the non-compete clause is the Iowa clause. Let's be honest, because it's his alma mater. Obviously, it's a great program with all those resources and great fan base, all of that. But I think Kirk's going to be there a while. But I think Bret goes, I don't want to be the guy after Kirk, right? I want to be that at Illinois. I want to be the Hayden Fry at Illinois. I want to be the Barry Alvarez or Kirk Ferentz at Illinois, or Bill Snyder at Illinois. And I think he can be. It's not easy, and it's getting harder in the Big Ten. And maybe our measure of success of what Illinois football success is, maybe it's I don't know, Great Lakes division title. What are we going to call these divisions?
Yeah.
But, like, maybe it's that. But I do think he can bring competent, consistent, sustained success to Illinois, whatever that measure is.
If he is successful, I'm sure, like Iowa fans, I will get tired of the 7-5.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. But at the moment, I won't, which leads me to if we were to make a prediction about this year, and I'm going to kind of posit to you what I think is going to happen.
Yeah.
I think they're going to win the first two. And the reason I say that, as tricky as the Toledo and Kansas games are, if I truly feel as confident as I do in this coaching staff and all the veterans that are coming back and the chip on the shoulder mindset that I think will be riding with them throughout the year, they certainly will not be overlooking Toledo or Kansas, and I think they'll have a game plan. They'll execute it.
Did you hear what Bret Bielema is doing?
I love the night practices.
Well, he won't call Toledo. He calls them MAC champs.
He's
like, I do not call them Toledo. I call them MAC champs.
I need to be careful because everything this guy does, I'm like, I love that guy. I mean,
then he loses to Toledo, and you're like, what the hell is going on?
I know.
No, but I could see, like, this is where the game by game predictions. I always do one just for fun.
Yeah.
Everyone loves.
I try to chunk it up a little bit.
Right, but like, I probably will pick a 2-1 non-conference. I'll probably have them being Florida Atlantic, but I'll probably have them dropping one of those first ones, just good growing pains. Just like Indiana last year, they were by far a better team. Like, you knew watching that. If you watched the Indiana game, you're like, this team has gotten way better. Yet they shot themselves in the foot so many times, had one bad call against them.
And with a new quarterback, that's certainly a concern.
But, like, after the Indiana game, I even wrote, like, the column part I look at now, like, man, it just feels like Illinois, will they ever have the breakthrough?
I felt that.
Right.
I didn't walk in the stadium for the Virginia game because I was too pissed off.
But
I couldn't do it.
You knew they were better.
Yeah.
It's just, can they stop shooting themselves in the foot? And then they did, and look how good it was for the next 7 games. I do think this team probably will have some growing pains at certain points, and against Toledo or Kansas, that could cost you. Penn State's a really tough game. Florida Atlantic, they need to beat, but I'll probably pick them like 2-1 in the non-conference just because I do think they could have a setback there. But I don't, like, if they lose to Toledo or they lose to Kansas, like, that's not going to be one of those games for me that Illini fans in the past would have said, oh, they aren't different. Like, oh, they're going to disappoint. I think they're going to get better as the season goes along because they just got guys that they're working in that'll need to get better and all those things. But they have a coaching staff that I think will get them on the right path if that happens. But if they start at 2-0 and they get to, say they lose to Penn State, but you got a chance 2-0 against Penn State, you might have a chance to get some votes at that point in the poll, especially if you're going to Kansas and beat them and have an impressive performance. and you got Big Noon kickoff here, that's a chance to really make a statement. And if you're able to get to 4-0 to start that year, we're getting way ahead of ourselves. Like, Illinois is going to have a ton of buzz and probably be considered the Big Ten West favorite going into that Purdue game.
Oh man, I'm gonna be a nervous wreck on September 30th.
But I will probably pick them to lose one of those Toledo or Kansas games, just because I think this team's gonna have some growing pains at certain points. But again, I think they'll bounce back from it, and I do think I could see them losing to Kansas and beating Penn State. Like, wouldn't that be an Illinois kind of thing? And it's kind of what the Big Ten West is. The Big Ten West just has these teams that one week could look like, that's a really mid team, and then the next one's like, oh, maybe that team will win the West.
I think if they find their way to a 2-1 start, no matter how they do it, they will be fine. And by fine, I mean like 8-4 kind of season. If you do start 1-2, there's a lot of, you got to start working your way back, and Florida Atlantic gives you a chance to do that. And I think to an extent Purdue does, because you're getting them early in the year where they're working in a lot of pieces themselves. I think that overall, that stretch right there of the Florida Atlantic, Purdue, and I want to say the game after that is fairly winnable as well.
One of the most interesting games, and nobody's probably going to have it.
Nebraska.
Yeah.
That 3-game stretch to me is the one where you can make hay.
A lot of night games there. The one game that intrigues me so much, and I don't know why, but it's sticking out to me as like a swing game for Illinois this year, is at Maryland.
You aren't going to win that game. I already know it. You just aren't.
It's a weird place to play. Like, the fan base is fine, but they just don't. They're kind of Indiana-ish because they care more about basketball. But they're talented. And Loxley's got a good offense, and they got a bunch of NFL guys on that team, and it's just kind of a sleeper game that no one's getting excited about because you got Purdue, you got Nebraska, you got these Big Ten West opponents. But that Maryland game just, for whatever reason, feels like a big swing game.
And then after that is Wisconsin. I think because of the timing of it, but sandwiched between Nebraska, Wisconsin home games. One of them's primetime Friday, and then the Wisconsin will likely be it might be a big noon if you keep winning. Who knows? But Karen and I are going to be in Vegas because we have a fall break for that Maryland game. So we're going to try to find one of those spots, the pool and the big TV. I forget what it's called.
Circus Sports.
We
did that for the when we were in Vegas last time for the Michigan game.
Right.
Unbelievable. But here's my measure of success. Like, we talked 7, 8 wins, whatever it is. Win more Big Ten games than you lose. To me, that is the measure of success. Illinois has not had 2 back-to-back winning Big Ten seasons since 92-93. 30 years, Carp.
Makovic and Tepper.
Said they had I think, and one of them was a 4-3 in 1 year. So there was some 4.
The tie. That was a 5-5-1 finish.
There was like a 4-4 year and like a 4-4 year, but that's not winning more than you lost, right? That was 8 games. But if you can be over 500 in the Big Ten for 2 straight years, to me that is sustainable. That is sustained success. That is building on what you have done. So for me, like, that could mean you go 1-2 or 2-1 in the non-conference or 3-0 in the non-conference. But against your conference foes, are you winning more than you lose? To me, that's the right now measure of success for Big Ten.
Because you have what I would like to consider 3 wins in your back pocket with Nebraska, Indiana, Northwestern at home, and I do consider all the. I mean, if this team is as good as I think you and I think they will be, you're going to win those 3 games. You feel fairly confident given where they're at in the season.
Yeah.
Which means for the other 6, you merely have to go 2-4. And I don't think that's too tall of a task when you avoid Michigan and Ohio State. I think that Wisconsin getting them at home is advantageous. I wouldn't like it if the shoe was on the other foot and you had to go up there in a raucous Luke Fickell first-year environment, even though he did well last year. Iowa, the measure of success.
Tough game at Kinnick.
Here's the measure of success for me, I think. I would be fine with 8-4, however you get there, Music City Bowl, or another trip to Tampa, even though I know it's not likely. But if you have any Big Ten West implications when you go to Iowa, that to me is the next step above a merely successful season.
And it's weird to say that, like, kind of copying last year is the measure of success, but for me, it's about doing it again.
And you know what the difference is?
Because of the history of Illinois.
If you avoid a prolonged slump where everything goes let's say this team finds their way to 8-4, but the difference is, as opposed to starting 7-1, they start 3-2. Then they win a couple games, then they lose one. A little bit of bouncing back and forth, I think, would take a hell of a lot of the, pull your hair out kind of anxiety of that November last year. Yeah. And I do think that the advantageous part of the schedule, apart from missing the 2 big boys in the East, is that a lot of the home games I think are winnable, including the Wisconsin one, getting them in year one of Fickle. And then Bielema tends to do well on the road since he's been here. I mean, you can go back to the first year with the wins at Penn State and Minnesota. You can go back to last year with the close call at Michigan. I mean, when they were dead in the water when that game started, and they should have won it.
I mean, and they also kept Minnesota from winning a Big Ten West championship 2 years ago.
That's right.
Remember? I mean, that team was ranked at the time.
And really, that was another one of those instances. The Minnesota games with Bielema, it's like you should have won both of those by 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, really good Minnesota. That was a really good Minnesota team. And PJ Fleck's been really good the last 3 years. He just has not been able to win that Big Ten West championship.
They're starting to get into Iowa, Kirk, for instance.
Yes.
Oh my God, 8-4 again, 7-5 again. They're getting tired of it.
You would like to be at that, where
Yes.
you're like, we're in contention every year. We have a chance every year of however long the division or whatever we do next. But yeah, I think this team has the upside of winning the Big Ten West. I think this team has the upside of 9 to 10 wins. I will be ticking between 7 and 8. I would take the over in Vegas. I think the downside, if Altmaier struggles or gets hurt, if they have an injury on the defensive line, if they have an injury to one of their key offensive linemen, then maybe that team could be in danger of 5. But I think they got enough depth now where you don't feel like, besides maybe Newton and Randolph, that if you have an injury to one of your players, that the season's derailed. Like, you hope you're at that point of your program now that even if one of those offensive linemen gets hurt, you have another guy that can step in and be serviceable at this point. Or if a quarterback gets hurt, that Donovan Leary or John Paddock give you a chance to win games.
What are we looking forward to the next month on Illini Inquirer? You guys don't get they don't open practice.
We don't get the training camp. The one thing I'll miss about the Lovie Smith era is the open practice. Like when he got hired, I was like, never gonna have training camp open again. But because of his NFL background, I was like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Bielema likes to control it a little bit more, not let his opponents know anything. So it's tougher for us to get to know things, but we do talk to the staff a lot. He does make the staff and the players available a lot. So we glean a lot from our conversations with them of who's going to be in the mix for all these things. So, yeah, we'll have coverage all the time. I got a big feature story coming out on Aaron Henry. We'll have notebooks every day of everything the players are saying. So as much as we can get out of the program, as much as we can learn from the stretching that we see, we will get it to you guys.
Excellent. Well, hey, appreciate your time. And it's nice to enter a season, unlike the years at 93.5 where you and Joey mentioned the hardcore fans would always get excited.
Yeah.
I would always find my way to some sort of excitement, but now it's a different kind of buzz around town, I can tell, and 10,000 new season tickets kind of
Operation Prolonged Relevancy, right?
And then finally, it seems like they're executing that plan.
Well, and the other thing that stands out here, Carp, is we're not talking Illinois basketball.
No.
Like, this isn't just some hors d'oeuvre to Illinois I think people are, for the first time, and that's why it's important that Illinois capitalize and have another good year, is fans are excited. Do it again, and fans are going to continue to be excited, and there'll become more generations of Illinois football fans. You'll get more people in the stands, but people are actually excited to see what is going to happen on the football field this year rather than, let's see it, and then we'll turn to basketball talk in October.
It's a far cry from the last 15 years, so it speaks to the health of the program. It's got to be fun to cover it. It's fun for me to just think about it and then talk about it, and the good thing is that they don't need to be great. As you said, just be good. People will subscribe to that. We don't need basketball levels of expectations. That's not how it works. Mm-hmm. If we're having that conversation 3 or 4 years from now and we're tired of the 7-8 wins a year, I'm a happy guy. Jeremy Werner, Illini Inquirer. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.